There's a type of person who can replay a 5-second conversation for 5 hours. You say one slightly awkward sentence, and suddenly their brain opens 47 different tabs. Why did I say that? Did they think I sounded weird? Should I text them and explain what I meant? By the time they try to sleep, they've already replayed the moment 10 different ways, and somehow every version feels worse. And if this sounds familiar, you've probably heard the same advice your whole life. Just stop thinking so much. But here's the strange part. What if overthinking isn't a flaw? What if your brain isn't broken at all, but simply doing one job a little too well? Because psychologists are starting to realize that people who overthink everything may not just be anxious. They may actually have minds built for deeper analysis, stronger pattern detection, and heightened awareness of what other people miss. First, let's clear up a huge misunderstanding. Overthinking is not just thinking a lot. If that were true, every philosopher, scientist, writer, and strategist would have a problem. Real overthinking is something more specific. Psychologists often connect it to something called rumination. That's when your mind keeps returning to the same thought over and over without actually resolving it. It's like your brain becomes a detective who refuses to close the case. Even when the clue was tiny, even when the moment was harmless, even when nobody else even remembers it happened. Most people do this sometimes, but for chronic overthinkers, it becomes a pattern. The brain keeps circling the same situation, not because it enjoys suffering, but because it believes there is still something important to figure out. Something hidden, something unfinished, something that might protect you next time. And that is what makes overthinking so exhausting. It feels productive, but often goes nowhere. So what's actually happening inside the brain of someone who overthinks everything? Research suggests that overthinkers often rely heavily on the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, planning, analysis, self-control, and predicting outcomes. In simple words, it's your brain's strategy center. Normally, the system helps you avoid mistakes. It helps you think before acting, plan ahead, read consequences, connect details. But when this system becomes too active, something interesting happens. Instead of helping you solve problems, it starts simulating possibilities. And suddenly, one small moment becomes a full mental movie. What if they misunderstood me? What if I made a bad impression? What if this changes the way they see me? Your brain isn't trying to torture you, it's trying to protect you. It just does it with too much detail and too many possible outcomes. That's why overthinking often feels endless, because your mind is no longer just observing reality, it's trying to predict every version of it. Here's where it gets even more interesting. People who overthink often notice things other people completely miss. A tiny pause before someone answers, a slight change in tone, a forced smile, a message that feels just a little colder than usual. Most people let those details pass. Thus, overthinkers don't. Their brains catch them instantly and start asking questions. What did that pause mean? Why did their face change? Did something feel off? And yes, that can be mentally exhausting, but it also reveals something important. Many overthinkers are highly sensitive to emotional patterns, social cues, and subtle shifts in behavior. In other words, the same brain that overanalyzes conversations often understands people very deeply. This is why overthinking and empathy can live in the same mind. Because when your brain constantly scans for hidden meaning, it doesn't only find danger, sometimes it finds depth. But of course, there's a downside. Because the brain has a strange habit, it often reacts to imagined problems as if they are real ones. So when you mentally create 5 negative outcomes, your body doesn't always wait to see if any of them happen. It responds now. Stress rises, your chest feels tighter, sleep gets harder, your mind gets louder, and suddenly you feel drained, not because something terrible happened, but because your brain prepared for it like it already did. This is one of the hardest parts of overthinking. It creates emotional weight from mental possibility. The danger may be imaginary, but the exhaustion is real. And that's why overthinking so often turns into mental noise. Your mind is doing its job just too intensely, too often, and without enough rest. But here's the plot twist. The very same mind that creates overthinking can also create deep insight, because people who overthink are often strong at things other people struggle with. They can analyze complex situations, they can spot patterns early, they can sense emotional tension before anyone says a word, they can imagine consequences before decisions are made. And in the right context, that ability is powerful. In fact, many people who think deeply also become excellent problem solvers, observers, writers, strategists, therapists, and creators. So the problem is not deep thinking itself. The problem is getting trapped inside it. Because when deep thinking moves forward, it becomes reflection. When it circles endlessly, it becomes rumination. Same brain, different direction. So the real question is not, why do I think so much? The real question is, what kind of thinking am I doing? Is this thought helping me understand something, or is it just pulling me into another loop? Psychologists often separate reflection from rumination in one simple way. Reflection moves toward clarity, rumination moves in circles. Reflection asks, what can I learn from this? Rumination asks, why can't I stop thinking about this? That difference changes everything, because healing doesn't come from shutting your brain off. It comes from teaching your mind when to explore and when to let go. If you overthink everything, there's a good chance your brain is not weak. It's highly active, highly observant, and highly detailed. You notice more, you process more, you imagine more. And while that can become overwhelming, it can also become one of your greatest strengths. The goal is not to become someone who stops thinking. The goal is to become someone who knows when thinking is useful and when it's becoming a trap. Because once you learn to guide your thoughts instead of getting dragged by them, overthinking stops feeling like a curse and starts looking a lot more like untamed intelligence. If this video explains something you've never been able to put into words, don't stop here. The videos on screen go even deeper into why your mind replays conversations and why certain people need more alone time than others. I'll see you there.